Okay, I'd like to just invite Kathy Carlson, Joanne Ward, Mark Conkel, Vera Michelli. These are some of our parent leaders on Staten Island. Kathy is the president of the Staten Island Federation of PTAs. Vera is the president of our President's Council. Joanne Ward is the director of Parent on Staten Island. And Mark Conkel is the high school council representative. I believe they each have a statement, and then from there we'll just go into questions. I don't know if we're going to go from the sign sheet or maybe just by raising hands. So this is the microphone, Steve, just bring it up and turn it on.
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. First, a brief comment when they come together and express that this year's test will be more difficult and that it's anticipated that the test scores will reflect that the test is more difficult. I find this statement somewhat disheartening, though, that the chancellor is not really placing a lot of confidence in his teachers and in our students. So, maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised, and I truly hope that we will. Majority of my questions were regarding 4th and 7th grade placement, but you did address that. So what I would like to ask you about is that this year's test is going to be used as a baseline. And so what exactly does that baseline mean? And what does that truly mean for our struggling students? You're saying that the bottom 10% will be going to recommended for summer school. What if the flip side does happen and a huge number of students do very, very poorly? What kind of support will be in place for these students? And then we have to realize that this trend will continue for several years, not just suddenly going to do really well on next year's test or 2 years from now. So if you could explain the baseline.
Sure. So let me first just respond to the concern you raised about the Chancellor's letter to parents. And I want to be really clear, because he said this in that letter as well, that he believes that students are going to rise to the challenge. And while we know that it's likely that fewer kids are going to pass this year, because the state commissioner has said that we should expect the performance on these exams to look a lot more like the National Assessment for Educational Progress, which is called the NAEP exam. That's something that's given to a sample of kids every year in New York City and New York State and across the country. And we've released data on that every year, and it's widely reported in the press. And generally, the scores in terms of kids passing on the NAEP exam are about 20 to 30 points lower than the state exams. And so there are fewer kids who pass that exam. The commissioner has said that he intends to use that as a reference point as he's deciding how many kids should meet the passing mark on this exam. And I'll give you another example of what's different. Like on the old state exams, the 8th grade exam had 5th grade reading passages, 5th grade level reading passages. And so this new exam is going to have 8th grade level reading passages on the 8th grade exam. And I'll be honest, I want to know if our 8th graders can respond to an 8th grade reading passage. And if they can, I need to know that so that I can work with our teachers and our principals to equip them, because it's not going to serve them well to go into the world three years behind. That's not fair to them. And so even though it may be challenging at the beginning, we need to, and this is an answer to your question about the new baseline, we need to see this as important information that's going to give us a sense of whether our kids are on track to really be given the choices that we want for them when they finish school. And if we don't have that information when they're in 5th grade or 8th grade, if we wait until finding out once they're in college that they didn't have it, it's not fair to them. And it's also not fair to their teachers, because they can't figure out how to move kids if they're shooting at a bar that's too low. And so it's important to have that baseline information. And the reason why he said it as a baseline is he doesn't think that we should be making comparisons to the exams from prior years, because it's not an apples to apples. This is really different. And it's pushing on skills we want for our children, but it doesn't mean that everyone's going to be there yet. So does that get to what you're asking?
What supports you that you're going to be?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So you had asked about what if there's a lot more kids that don't do well on the test. So in past years, the way we've done the summer school is we've looked at a prediction on how many kids are going to make it to level 2 on the state exam. We cannot do that this year because we don't know what level 2 is going to be. And nor does the state. They're not going to know until late July, August when they give us the results. And so we do know, though, that historically there have been kids that really needed help over the summer. And it's been some years 8%, some years 11%, some years 9%. But it's pretty consistently close in the range of 10%. So we think it's responsible not to create a big increase in the number of kids that are held back. We know everyone in the system is going to be working, has been working on making sure that kids get prepared for this, but it's going to take several years for kids really to reach the standard. And it's not that kids are weaker students as a result of a harder test. It's not that our kids are less successful than they were last year. It's that we are getting a more honest picture and a tougher look at what they actually need for life. And so we need that information, and then we need to build in the supports. And it's going to be a lot of what we have been doing this year. So academic intervention supports will be available for kids that are struggling with literacy or numeracy. We've introduced RTI, which is process to look at our elementary students and figure out where are they struggling, what kinds of small group work might they need, what kinds of one-on-one support might they need. We've been working with our special education program to create more access points for kids into the general ed curriculum. We've spent a lot of energy and resources training folks around English language learners, who are some of the kids who will have more challenge on the literacy front. And as I said before, teachers have now been working with us, principals have now been working with us for a couple of years on this. And I see this as a 5-year process. Sam mentioned the national exams that the Obama administration has been working on. Those will come into place in a couple of years. Those exams arguably are going to be tougher than these ones because they're going to actually go even deeper and ask for even more writing. And so giving our kids a shot at getting used to this now, so that when the national exams get implemented by the state in 2015, they've actually had a couple years doing Common Core line work, is the right decision. And I honestly, as much stress and anxiety that this time of year brings, and I feel that, and I'm in schools every day, I know how challenging this can be. I think we also, as the parents, as the teachers, as the educators in the system, we need to try and help our kids reduce some of that anxiety and let them know that this is a process that, no, I'm serious about that. No, I'm not kidding. Well, we'll have a chance to dialogue, so let me just finish answering the question, then other folks. This is a real thing for all of us, not just parents, but educators as well. And I think part of the message to kids needs to be, look, these are important, but they're not the end of the world. Nothing terrible is going to happen if you don't do well. This is about understanding.
You're not receiving that message at school. That's right.
Let's not dialogue with everyone speaking at once. There's going to be a chance for each person to ask their question. One of the things you'll see on our website is we put out talking points for principals to share with parents about the changes. We also have some advice of things that parents should consider talking about with their students. And those are resources that educators in our schools work hard on, who've been working with kids in these situations for many years. And so I think they're useful tools. It's not going to be exactly right for every family, but it's something that is an important resource that I encourage you to look at if you haven't seen it.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shael. I'm program director for Parent New York, Inc., and also the project coordinator for Staten Island Special Education Parent Center. So I will be representing parents of children with IEPs, special needs, and I have some comments around alternate assessment, and I'd like to read an article, an excerpt from an article from the Washington Post, and then just louder? Okay. So I'd like to read an excerpt from the Washington Post by a principal, and also to talk to you about the concerns that our parents on Staten Island are facing. So get your pens ready to write, okay? All right, so I have a lot to say about this topic. Okay, I was thinking about it when Sam asked me to speak, and I said, well, these are some of the issues that I want to talk about, okay? How federal and state funds are allocated, educational policy and practice, student performance indicators and accountability, alternate assessment, New York State rates at the top of New York State Elementary and Secondary Act waiver, also known as the ESEA, high stakes tests, opt-out options, all of the above as it relates to students with disabilities and Common Core. The list goes on. However, for the sake of time, I will tell you about the concerns we're hearing from our families, okay? Common Core standards places an enormous pressure on teachers, principals, and others responsible for delivering instruction to meet the demands of the high-stakes test imposed on the children. For children with disabilities who struggle with anxiety, fear, and other challenges associated with their disability, meeting the demands of the Common Core standards are placing unnecessary, unwanted pressures at home and in school. I've had parents call me up telling their kids are ready to commit suicide at this test, okay? More and more students with disabilities are recommended to participate in alternate assessment as early as kindergarten in our community schools on Staten Island. Alternate assessment is being sold as a bill of goods, so to speak, to parents. They're told their child performance will be based on classroom performance as demonstrated through student portfolio, offering less stress for the child and the parent as well. In the Washington Post, updated March 4, 2013, an article called Principal, I Was Naive About Common Core, was written by an award-winning principal named the 2010 New York State Outstanding Educator, and she stated, and I quote, "What occurs in a data-driven, high-stakes learning environment is that the full domain of what should be learned narrows to those items tested. The Common Core wants to grow students in 5 skill areas in ELA: reading, writing, speaking, listening, and collaboration. But the Common Core test will only measure reading and writing. What gets measured gets done. Can you speak to the issue about how will teachers address the areas of speaking, listening, and collaboration for students with disabilities if their teacher performance indicators, as well as the school, are dependent on Common Core standards and assessments rather than curriculum and instruction?" That's question 1. Question 2. How will the results of the new ELA math test affect promotion and impact summer school eligibility for students with disabilities? I know you addressed that to the bottom 10%, but for those students with IEPs and have modified promotion criteria with the 10% modified promotion criteria, how does that going to impact them? They're already axed out of that summer school option. How does the DOE propose to measure listening, speaking, and collaboration in practice for assessment and testing purposes? How can you measure those things? Can you measure a collaborative effort? I'd like to know how we're going to do that. How is the DOE proposing to address parental concerns to protect and ensure students with disabilities have the same access to the general education curriculum that affords them the opportunity to take the New York State ELA and math test and avoid inappropriate recommendation for alternate assessment, which, by the way, in kindergarten we're getting numerous calls for that? How will the DOE ensure the instructional supports, such as assistive adaptive communication devices and technology for inclusive education, are implemented in the least restrictive environment to meet the demands of the Common Core standards for students with disabilities?
Thank you, and I want to thank you for your advocacy and the work that you're doing to support parents. And I think that the questions you've asked are really important. I stay up here because I might forget. You have a lot. But let me try and answer some of them and then remind me of the ones I forgot. So one of the questions you were asking about is you know, what's tested is what gets taught. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to do since I came into this role a couple of years ago is really put out a lot of rich curriculum resources into our schools in order to make sure that there are exciting and challenging and interesting things going on, and not the kind of narrowing that you're concerned with, because I'm concerned with that too. And I'll give you an example. I was in a school last week that was doing, I'll tell you about two classes I saw that I thought were really good examples of the kind of work I would want to be seeing elections coming for. The first class had what they call the Socratic Smackdown, where the kids had read articles about I don't know if you guys read about this, but in England they found out that horse was being used in the burgers, and there was a big scandal there. So the teacher had picked up that this was going to be a hot topic for middle school kids, and found 4 or 5 different articles at different reading levels from different perspectives, cultural, political, economic, about the different kinds of meat production, but also different cultural traditions around it. And she had the kids organized in groups, and they were debating each other, and the kids who were not in the debate at that moment had a rubric, and they were actually scoring their peers on whether they were using evidence from the articles that they had read, whether they were talking to each other in ways that built the conversation. So your question around how could you measure collaboration, this was actually a great example of kids working in teams in a competitive game against each other based on nonfiction texts that they had read and trying to use the evidence in order to win the argument. We went next door to a math class where the kids were doing a project with manipulatives where they had to figure out how to convert fractions to decimals and meters. And then once they had gotten their answer, they had little whiteboards, and they were going around group to group, one representative from each group, and they had to defend their answer in front of the other kids in that group, and some of the answers were wrong, and so they had to work on changing them. Now these were both CTT classrooms, where I could not tell the difference between the special ed student and the general ed student in those classrooms, nor could I tell who was the special educator or the general ed teacher. And it was tapping into various modalities of learning styles and creating entry points for kids in a way that was interesting and exciting, and it was preparing them for exactly the skills that are going to be on this exam. So I think that's not an easy thing to do. That takes real work for designing that, and it takes work to execute it.
It's working, and where principals are allowing the teachers the autonomy, and principals are allowing the opportunity to provide that instruction.
Yes, but
because it's not that way with all schools.
No, I agree with you, and I think, I mean, one of the things I wish, sitting in the seat where I have 1,700 schools, even if I spent every single day for the next 20 years, I wouldn't be able to visit all of them. And so it's a huge system, and we all know that, you know, even when you were in school, like there were teachers that were stronger and there were teachers that were weaker, and we've always known that. And part of the challenge is, just like kids, everyone's on a spectrum of development. And we need to work with our teachers and develop their capacity to do this well. And autonomy is important, but in this school, it wasn't the teacher who had initiated this. This was part of the school's strategy around Common Core.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you. And I'm really concerned because I have teachers that call me. I have had assistant principals call me who have told me their frustration. Teachers do not have access to training. Teachers are stuck in lunchrooms preparing lessons while their parents are doing the classroom instruction, okay? It is run amok. I have a sister in the system who is pulling her hair out. The demands that need to be met, and special education students, they're saying that the indicators are going to fall that those students are performing well. I have nieces and nephews that are 3s and 4s. These kids are struggling. One of my nieces has been a 4 student who is struggling to make it through. The kid is literally pulling her hair out, crying every day. I mean, and I'm not the only one, I'm just telling you an example. I have family members that could be on alternately assessed because of this. This is a major problem. Coming to our facility in many, many states. We here at the Department of Education in New York City is being an example. Alternate assessment, families that need that is recommended alternate assessment, there needs to be at least a form with an opt-in that parents are shown, and it is the eligibility requirements and what they're signing on to needs to be addressed. Because parents do not know what they're signing on to with alternate assessment. And there is no policy in place. There's no written policy, there's no state regs on it, and this is a major issue.
Well, I thank you for raising it. I agree with you. If one of the things that you're seeing is kids being inappropriately referred, we need to partner closely to address that and find those cases, because that should not happen. And if we don't have the right systems in place to prevent it from happening, I know that this is something that Kareem Rillos and Selmy cares deeply about and believes exactly the same thing that you believe in. So we will work with you to address that, because that should not be happening.
It's funny, we're in this city and there
Just to let you know that we've already arranged a meeting with alternate assessment. Who's coming? I'm going to just
Sorry, you spoke last night. I went back and we're going to have a meeting on April 26th. I think you know that, right? With Shael and she's going to address that issue with alternate assessment.
I just think that I know that everybody here is concerned about the issue.
There's no checks and balances for that particular
No checks
recommendation.
and balances.
So that particular meeting will be on the 26th at 10 o'clock. The meeting place will be determined, but everyone, that's going to be a committee meeting, a meeting similar to this, so absolutely anyone who has a question about that is welcome to attend that meeting. So,
And I did have 3 or 4 more questions, but I don't know.
Well, here's what I would say. Email me the questions that you didn't get answered, and we will put it into that FAQ document. Okay?
Welcome. Thank you, Sam, for inviting us. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me to make a comment. Mr. Suransky, the people are here today because they're scared. And the problem has been historically that the Department of Education has a problem with communication. My kids have been in the school system 17 years now, and the problems remain the same. Many years ago, there were tests in 3 to 8, and then it went from grades 3 through 8, and kids were very, very scared. The Leadership Academy had not taken its, entered a lot of principles yet, and there's still a lot of old-time principles that emphasize that if you taught kids well, it obviated the need for test prep. The concern I have today, and I think it's reflected in the appearance of so many parents today, is that despite the value of testing, testing has overtaken instruction. You're not going to find someone who likes data and testing more than I. But when it becomes a life unto itself, it reflects that one person, yourself, can't get to 1,700 school visits, but you have to set the tone. And the tone is that principals, maybe because they're too young, maybe because data is everything, reflects that instruction too often takes a back seat to ongoing, test prep takes a back seat to ongoing instruction. And what I think you could do is set that tone to improve this notion that test prep is not everything. And let me just finish with the principles that my kids used to have. Used to try to calm all the kids down, because my youngest kid, used to cry when there was all these tests coming up. I told him to calm down, take a deep breath. We'll all be here tomorrow. He's graduating Staten Island Tech next year. We all need to calm down, take a deep breath, because graduation rates are not going to go down 30 or 40%. They're not. And if kids' test scores go down 20, 30, 40%, everybody's test scores are going down 20, 30, 40%. We're all being compared. I urge you to communicate earlier and often that we're all going to be here tomorrow, that our kids will do okay, and we're going to all pass these tests. Just finally, what can you do to tell principals that instruction, phys ed, language is really just as important as passing tests? And you pass along the methodology to our principals that if they do good instruction, that they're all capable of, that their teachers are capable of, we're all in this boat together, and they're going to pass. I really appreciate a comment there.
Well, I think your advice on taking a breath is wise, and I appreciate it. I think that the message that you're communicating is actually the message that I have been communicating, and it may be that the balance between the accountability that people feel and the sort of resources and support that we put out there isn't right. You know, it could be that even though that is the message, if you look at the letters that I've sent to principals, if you were at the meetings that I've done about this topic over the past few years here in Staten Island, you've heard me talk about this, and you heard tonight that I talk about this as an instructional initiative, and I'm excited about the changes that I'm seeing in instruction that actually move away from test prep. And I know that there are places where that has not taken root, but that classroom that I described to you was 2 weeks away from a test, and they were not doing traditional test prep. I've also been in other schools in the last week where there was test prep activity going on, and so I know that both are happening, and that depending on the context that you're in, you know, you're going to respond based on that experience. And so here's what I would say we need to work on together. I think the concerns that you've raised and that other parents have raised about getting the balance right is really important. And if it doesn't feel right to parents, then we haven't gotten it right yet. And we need to work on that.
I'll just leave you with one comment. If you were a kid in a self-contained class who already had test anxiety, and you heard that the test was going to reflect 8th grade reading, and you're in 5th grade, what do you think a parent would feel like if they hadn't been told many months in advance, look, we're doing something new. We're not going to change your kid's outlook or chances of passing, but we're doing something new, so everybody in the great middle, not the geniuses up top or the kids who are always going to struggle, the great middle, everybody's going to do better together, so we're going to be able to all more, at a higher instance, pass CUNY entrance exams. That's real communication. Otherwise, the kid in 5th grade self-contained is scared, and the parents are pissed off. And here we are. So, you know, the communication can be a little better.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I take your point, and it's part of the reason I'm here tonight. Just to be clear, 5th graders are not going to have an 8th grade.
Yes.
No, that is an incorrect rumor. 5th graders are going to have 5th grade level reading on their exam, which has not been the case historically.